Imagine a man who possessed all the wisdom in the world, unimaginable riches, and divine favor, but who made a mistake that cost him everything. Solomon, the wisest king in history, made a decision that not only destroyed his own soul, but divided an entire nation. How could someone with such great wisdom make such devastating choices? The answer will surprise you and, more importantly, will alert you to traps that still destroy lives today. In the comments, tell me, do you believe that human wisdom can be a trap when it's not aligned with divine principles? Picture the ancient city of Jerusalem, its limestone walls gleaming under the desert sun. The year is approximately 970 BC, and the greatest kingdom in the ancient world is about to witness a transition that will echo through eternity. King David, the man after God's own heart, lies on his deathbed, his weathered hands clutching the covers as he contemplates the future of Israel. The palace corridors buzz with tension. Adonijah, David's eldest surviving son, has already declared himself king, gathering chariots and horsemen in a desperate bid for power. But God had other plans. Through the prophet Nathan and Bathsheba, David's beloved wife, the dying king's attention turns to Solomon, a young man barely 20 years old. Let Solomon my son be king after me, David declares with his final breath of authority. The decision sends shockwaves through the kingdom. Why Solomon? He wasn't the eldest. He wasn't the most experienced warrior, but in God's economy he often chooses the unexpected. As Solomon approaches the sacred tent where the Ark of the Covenant resides, his heart pounds with the weight of responsibility. The golden artifacts gleam in the flickering lamplight. The air is thick with incense and the presence of the Almighty. This young man, about to inherit a kingdom stretching from Egypt to the Euphrates River, falls prostrate before God. Ask what? I shall give you. God speaks in a dream that night at Gibeon. Imagine the moment, the creator of the universe offering a blank check to a young king. What would you ask for? Wealth beyond measure, victory over enemies, a long life filled with pleasure. Solomon's response reveals the heart that caught God's attention. Give your servant therefore an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. The request pleases God so much that he grants not only wisdom, but also riches and honor beyond any king before or after. But hidden in this divine blessing lies a test that Solomon doesn't yet recognize. With great gifts come great temptations. The famous judgment of the two women claiming the same baby soon follows. Word spreads like wildfire through Jerusalem's narrow streets. The young king who suggested cutting the child in half to reveal the true mother has demonstrated wisdom that seems almost supernatural. Merchants in the bazaars whisper in amazement. Farmers in distant villages hear the story and marvel. But as Solomon sits on his golden throne, receiving the praise of his subjects, something subtle begins to shift in his heart. The seeds of pride, so small they're nearly invisible, begin to take root in the soil of acclaim. 20 years have passed, and Jerusalem has transformed into a city that defies imagination. The morning sun reflects off polished marble columns and golden ornaments that adorn every surface of Solomon's expanded palace complex. The sound of hammers and chisels echoes constantly as thousands of workers labor on the most ambitious project in human history, the Temple of the Lord. Solomon stands on the highest tower of his palace, surveying his domain. Caravans stretch as far as the eye can see, bringing ivory from Africa, gold from Ophir, and precious stones from distant lands. His fleet of ships dominates the Mediterranean while his merchant ventures control trade routes from India to Spain. The numbers are staggering. His annual income reaches 666 talents of gold, roughly 25 tons of pure gold every year. His throne, carved from ivory and overlaid with the finest gold, sits in a hall of judgment that leaves foreign dignitaries speechless. Even his drinking cups are made of gold. Silver is considered too common for the king's table. The temple construction has become the wonder of the ancient world. Lebanese cedar quarried stones fitted so perfectly no mortar is needed, and gold covering every surface of the inner sanctuary. When the Queen of Sheba arrives to test Solomon's wisdom, she can barely catch her breath. The half was not told me, she gasps, witnessing luxury that surpasses every story she had heard. But observe Solomon carefully during these glory days. Notice how his prayers become shorter while his buildings grow taller. Watch how he spends more time consulting his advisors and less time seeking God's counsel. The man who once walked humbly before the Lord now requires an entourage of servants wherever he goes. The first warning signs appear in his dining habits. The daily provisions for his household include 30 measures of fine flour, 60 measures of meal, 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed cattle, and 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. This isn't just abundance, it's excess that would make ancient emperors envious. More concerning is his growing fascination with the customs and gods of his trading partners. Egyptian architecture influences his building projects. Phoenician religious symbols begin appearing. In the palace decorations, each compromise seems small, reasonable, even just good business sense for maintaining international relationships. The transformation is gradual but relentless. The young man who once feared God above all else now fears losing his wealth, his reputation, his political alliances. Success, intended as a blessing, slowly becomes a golden prison that separates him from the source of all wisdom. That Solomon signs another trade agreement with a foreign king requiring cultural and religious concessions. He doesn't realize he's taking the first steps down a path that will cost him everything he's worked to build. What do you think of Solomon's journey so far? Are you seeing warning signs that he might be missing? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The marriage proposal arrives on papyrus sealed with the pharaoh's golden cartouche. Solomon studies the ornate hieroglyphics, translated by his Egyptian scribes. The pharaoh offers his daughter's hand in marriage, along with the strategic city of Gezer as a dowry. The political implications are enormous. A military alliance with Egypt would secure Israel's southern border and open new trade opportunities. Standing in his council chamber, surrounded by advisors whose robes shimmer with gold thread, Solomon weighs the decision. The walls are decorated with maps showing Israel's expanding influence, but also the growing threats from neighboring kingdoms. His military commanders speak of the need for stronger alliances. His treasury officials calculate the economic benefits. But there's another voice in the room, quieter, almost drowned out by the louder counselors. It's the voice of the priests, reminding the king of God's clear command in Deuteronomy. You shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons, for they would turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. Solomon's response reveals how far his thinking has already shifted. This is different, he reasons. This is about securing the kingdom God gave me. Surely the Lord wants me to be wise in statecraft. The rationalization sounds reasonable, even spiritual. After all, isn't it his responsibility as king to protect his people? The wedding ceremony takes place in Jerusalem with unprecedented grandeur. Egyptian priests perform their rituals alongside Hebrew ceremonies. The pharaoh's daughter arrives with an entourage that includes servants, soldiers, and her personal collection of household gods. Small statues that seem harmless but carry the spiritual DNA of foreign worship. As Solomon gazes at his new bride, resplendent in Egyptian gold and lapis lazuli, he feels the intoxication of power and exotic beauty. She's intelligent, cultured, and brings connections to the most sophisticated civilization on Earth. What could be wrong with such a beneficial arrangement? The pattern, once established, becomes easier to repeat. Within a few years, marriage proposals arrive from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and the Hittites. Each marriage comes with compelling political and economic justifications. Each new wife brings her own cultural practices, her own gods, her own influence. On the king's household, Solomon's palace complex expands to accommodate his growing family. Separate quarters are built for different wives, each decorated according to their homeland's customs. The sounds of various languages fill the courtyards. Incense from different religious traditions mingles in the evening air. But notice what's happening to Solomon's spiritual life during this period. His public prayers become more generic, less specifically directed to Yahweh. He begins incorporating phrases and concepts from other religious traditions, calling it wisdom from many sources. His personal devotion time decreases as his domestic responsibilities multiply. The most troubling change is in his attitude toward God's law. Where he once saw divine commands as absolute truth, he now views them as general principles that must be balanced against practical realities. The word compromise becomes central to his vocabulary, and each compromise makes the next one easier. His sons and daughters grow up in this multicultural environment, learning that all gods are essentially the same, that tolerance and inclusion are the highest virtues. The exclusive worship of Yahweh begins to seem narrow, even primitive, compared to the sophisticated religious pluralism of international diplomacy. But as Solomon signs his 100th marriage contract, he has no idea that he's not just collecting wives, he's collecting the instruments of his own spiritual destruction. The man who once had the wisdom to discern between good and evil is slowly losing the ability to recognize the difference. Thank you for staying with us through this incredible story. the best is yet to come as we witness how these dangerous alliances lead to consequences that will shake the very foundations of Israel. The morning light filters through the ornate windows of Solomon's private chambers, casting shadows across a scene that would have horrified his father, David. 700 wives and 300 concubines, 1,000 women whose hearts belong to gods other than the Lord of Israel. The king's residence has become a virtual marketplace of religions, each wife bringing her own spiritual baggage into the heart of God's chosen nation. Solomon, now in his 50s, moves through his palace like a man caught between worlds. His beard, streaked with gray, frames a face that shows the weight of managing not just a kingdom, but a household that rivals a small city. The sound of foreign prayers echoes from various quarters as his wives perform their morning rituals to Ashtoreth, Milcom, Chemosh, and dozens of other deities. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It began with small accommodations, allowing his Egyptian wife to keep a small shrine in her chambers. Just a cultural comfort, nothing more. Then his Moabite wife requested a place to burn incense to Chemosh. Surely, Solomon reasoned, showing respect for his wife's traditions demonstrated sophistication and leadership. But observe what happens when compromise becomes a lifestyle. The shrewd business mind that once distinguished between profitable and unprofitable ventures gradually loses its ability to distinguish between sacred and profane. The man who could once solve any political puzzle finds himself unable to recognize the spiritual puzzle that's trapping his own soul. The breaking point comes when Solomon makes his most devastating decision. On the Mount of Olives, directly across from the temple he built for God, he constructs high places for the gods of his foreign wives. The irony is staggering. The same hands that built the most magnificent house of worship in history now build altars for God's enemies. Picture the scene as Solomon participates in these foreign rituals. The man who once spoke with God face to face now burns incense to Moloch, the god who demands child sacrifice. The king who received divine wisdom now seeks guidance from wooden idols that cannot see, hear, or speak. The heart that once beat in perfect rhythm with heaven's purposes now pounds with the confusion of divided loyalties. His wives, initially grateful for his tolerance, begin to sense something broken in their husband. A man who tries to serve every god ultimately serves none with passion. His conversations become calculated, his affections distributed so thinly that no one feels truly loved. The palace that should have been filled with joy echoes instead with the hollow sound of religious activity without spiritual life. The most tragic aspect is Solomon's self-deception. He believes he's being wise, inclusive, diplomatically savvy. In his mind, he's evolved beyond the narrow religiosity of his ancestors into a more sophisticated understanding of divinity. He tells himself that all these gods are just different expressions of the same ultimate reality, but God sees what Solomon cannot. The Lord who blessed him with unprecedented wisdom watches as that very wisdom becomes corrupted by pride and sensuality. The gifts meant to draw Solomon closer to his Creator become the instruments of his rebellion against heaven. The scripture records the moment when God's patience reaches its limit, and the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he did not keep what the Lord commanded. As Solomon kneels before another foreign altar, burning incense to another powerless idol, he doesn't realize that he's not just betraying God, he's betraying every promise, every blessing, every divine encounter that shaped his life. The man who once had everything is about to lose it all, and he doesn't even know it yet. The throne room that once hosted the Queen of Sheba now feels cold and empty. Solomon, approaching 70, sits alone on his golden throne, but the weight pressing down on him isn't from his elaborate crown, it's from the crushing reality of divine judgment. The kingdom that took 40 years to build is about to be torn apart in a single generation. The prophet Ahijah stands before the king, his weathered face bearing the stern expression of a man carrying God's verdict. His words cut through the perfumed air like a sword. Because you have done this and have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. Solomon's hands tremble as the full weight of his choices becomes clear. The 1,000 wives who seemed like such advantageous alliances have become the instruments of Israel's destruction. Every compromise that felt reasonable in the moment has contributed to this catastrophic conclusion. The irony is devastating. The man who asked for wisdom to govern God's people has governed them right into division and defeat. The king who was supposed to be the climax of Israel's golden age has become the architect of its decline. The son of David, chosen to establish an eternal dynasty, has forfeited that inheritance through spiritual adultery. But God's mercy shines even in judgment. For David's sake, the kingdom won't be completely destroyed during Solomon's lifetime. One tribe will remain loyal to his son. It's a grace that Solomon doesn't deserve but receives anyway. A reminder that God's faithfulness persists even when ours fails. The final years of Solomon's reign are marked by external rebellions that mirror his internal spiritual rebellion. Hadad the Edomite rises up from the south. Rezon, son of Eliab, creates trouble from Damascus in the north. Most painfully, Jeroboam, his own trusted servant who supervised the forced labor, becomes the focal point of the coming division. Solomon's attempts to eliminate these threats reveal how far he's fallen. From his early wisdom, the king who once resolved conflicts through discernment now relies on political assassination and military force. The man who once trusted God for protection now trusts only in his own schemes and the loyalty of his foreign mercenaries. Se walks through his palace in his final days. Solomon passes by the quarters of his many wives, but there's no joy in these relationships anymore. What began as passion has become duty. What started as political alliance has become a burden heavy to bear. The very abundance that was supposed to demonstrate God's blessing has become the evidence of God's curse. The most heartbreaking aspect of Solomon's story is found in the book of Ecclesiastes, likely written during these final bitter years. Vanity of vanities, he writes, all is vanity. The man who possessed more wisdom, wealth, and women than anyone in history concludes that life without God is meaningless, but even in his cynicism, flashes of his former wisdom appear. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It's as if the old Solomon occasionally breaks through the layers of compromise and rebellion to remind us of what really matters. When Solomon dies, the kingdom he built dies with him. His son Rehoboam inherits the throne but loses 10 of the 12 tribes within months. The unified kingdom of Israel, the dream of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, splits into two smaller, weaker nations that will never again reach the heights of Solomon's early reign. The lesson of Solomon's life echoes through history as a warning to every generation. Success without submission to God becomes failure. Wisdom divorced from worship becomes foolishness. Blessing misused becomes a curse. The very gifts meant to draw us closer to God can become idols that separate us from Him. Solomon's story isn't just ancient history, it's a mirror reflecting our own capacity for self-deception and spiritual compromise. How many of us, like Solomon, have justified small compromises that gradually led us away from God's best? How many of us have mistaken God's patience for approval of our disobedience? The warning is clear. No amount of wisdom, wealth, or worldly success can compensate for abandoning our first love. The heart that turns away from God will ultimately find that all its achievements are as meaningless as chasing the wind. What struck you most about Solomon's tragic downfall? How can we learn from his mistakes to avoid making similar ones in our own lives? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your insights might encourage someone else who's struggling with compromise in their spiritual journey. If this story has challenged you to examine your own heart, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. In our next video, we'll explore the life of another sacred biblical character whose journey will inspire and teach us profound lessons. If there's a specific biblical figure you'd like us to cover, let us know in the comments below. Until then, remember, it's not how we start the race that matters most, but how we finish it.